By 1943, the war in the Pacific had become a grim equation. To defeat the Empire of Japan, the United States would have to cross the largest ocean on Earth, fighting its way up a ladder of fortified islands, each one a stepping stone on the bloody road to Tokyo. This was island hopping, officially Operation Cartwheel, a strategy born of brutal necessity. At the tip of this spear was the United States Marine Corps. But the Japanese were not idle. They transformed every volcanic rock and coral atoll into a fortress of death. They adopted a new, terrifying doctrine. No longer would they try to stop the Americans at the water's edge. Instead, they would let them land, draw them into a prepared killing ground, and bleed them white. A war of attrition designed to break American morale and make the cost of victory so horrifically high that the United States would sue for peace. The result was a series of head-on collisions between two of the most determined fighting forces in history, battles that pushed men to the absolute limits of human endurance. But some assaults were more than just battles. They were crucibles of violence so concentrated, so utterly savage, they became the stuff of legend. These are the operations that were, for lack of a better word, insane. To rank these legendary battles, we're not just looking at casualty numbers. We're using a specific set of criteria to measure the true nature of the assault. First, tactical ferocity and terrain. This measures the raw, concentrated violence of the assault. How brutal was the resistance? How hellish was the environment? From coral reefs and volcanic ash to fortified caves and jungle heat. Second, strategic impact. How crucial was this assault to the overall island-hopping campaign? Did its outcome shorten the war, or was it a tragic waste? And third, the human cost. We're looking at the casualty rates, the price paid per man, per division, for every square yard of ground taken. This is a countdown of sacrifice, valor, and madness. Before we begin, we must honor the campaign that taught America how to fight in the Pacific. Guadalcanal. The first major Allied offensive, this brutal 6-month slugfest in the Solomon Islands, reversed the tide of the war. The fighting for Henderson Field, the battles along the Matanikau River, and the sheer misery of the jungle environment were legendary. The canal was a test of raw endurance that forged a generation of combat veterans. However, it doesn't make our main list for one key reason. The initial amphibious assault on August 7, 1942, was largely unopposed. The true horror of Guadalcanal was the sustained, grinding campaign of attrition that followed, a fight to hold what was taken. It set the stage, but the frontal assaults to come would be a different, more concentrated kind of hell. Our countdown begins with the battle that brought the war to Japan's doorstep, the assault on Saipan in the Mariana Islands. This island was the key. Its capture would put the revolutionary new B-29 Superfortress bombers within striking distance of the Japanese home islands. For the first time, America could begin the systematic destruction of Japan's industrial heartland. The Japanese commander, Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, knew the stakes. He had nearly 32,000 troops, and they were ordered to defend the island to the death. The fighting was savage. Marines battled through sugarcane fields and up the slopes of Mount Tapochau, facing a determined enemy dug into caves and fortified positions. Nicknames for terrain tell the story: Death Valley, Purple Heart Ridge, Hell's Pocket. But what pushes Saipan into the realm of insanity are two events that defined the fanatical nature of the war. First, the largest banzai charge of the entire Pacific conflict. On July 7th, with his forces shattered, General Saito ordered a final suicidal attack. An estimated 4,000 Japanese troops, soldiers, sailors, the walking wounded, and even civilians armed with bamboo spears, hurled themselves at the lines of the U.S. Army's 27th Infantry Division. The fighting was a chaotic 15-hour melee of bayonets, grenades, and desperate hand-to-hand combat that overran 2 battalions before the charge was finally annihilated. The Americans suffered over 900 casualties in that single action. Even more horrific was what followed. Japanese propaganda had convinced thousands of civilian colonists that they would be tortured and murdered by the American devils. Rather than surrender, hundreds, possibly thousands, chose mass suicide. Marines watched in horror as families threw themselves from the island's high cliffs. The capture of Saipan was a critical strategic victory, but the psychological scars it left and the horrifying glimpse it gave into the enemy's mindset places it firmly at number 5. The assault on Peleliu stands as one of the most controversial and arguably unnecessary battles of the Pacific War. Initially planned to secure General MacArthur's flank for his invasion of the Philippines, its strategic value was being questioned even before the first Marine hit the beach. It would become what the National Museum of the Marine Corps has called the bitterest battle of the war for the Marines. U.S. commanders predicted the island would fall in 4 days. It took over 2 months. On Peleliu, the Japanese perfected a terrifying new defensive doctrine, a war of attrition. The commander, Colonel Kunio Nakagawa, had forbidden wasteful banzai charges. His orders were simple: hold your positions, fight to the last man, and kill as many Americans as possible. Nakagawa had turned the island's central ridges, a hellish landscape of razor-sharp coral the Marines dubbed Bloody Nose Ridge, into an interlocking fortress of over 500 fortified caves, pillboxes, and underground positions. In his memoir, With the Old Breed, Marine Eugene Sledge described a landscape of shattered trees and coral dust, where daytime temperatures soared to 115 degrees Fahrenheit, water was dangerously scarce, and the stench of thousands of rotting bodies was a constant, gagging presence. The 1st Marine Division, the heroes of Guadalcanal, was effectively destroyed on Peleliu. It suffered over 6,500 casualties, a rate of over 40%, to capture an island whose airfields were ultimately of little use. It was a 73-day descent into a special kind of hell, an insane assault for an objective that history has largely forgotten. If Peleliu was a slow, grinding nightmare, the assault on Tarawa Atoll was a concentrated 76-hour explosion of pure violence. The target was the tiny island of Betio, barely 2 miles long and 800 yards wide, but defended by nearly 4,700 elite Japanese troops. Their commander, Rear Admiral Keiji Shibasaki, famously boasted to his men, "1,000,000 men cannot take Tarawa in 100 years." The 2nd Marine Division was about to try it in 3 days. From the very first minute, the plan was a catastrophe. Naval intelligence had misjudged the tides. A neap tide meant the water was too shallow for the Higgins boats to clear a coral reef 500 yards from shore. The LVTs, amphibious tractors, could make it, but there weren't enough. The Marines of the 2nd and 3rd waves were forced to abandon their boats and wade through hundreds of yards of chest-deep water, directly into the interlocking fields of fire from hundreds of expertly concealed Japanese machine guns and cannons. It was a slaughter. The first wave of Marines who made it ashore were pinned down behind a low sea wall, their numbers dwindling with every passing minute. Marine Colonel David M. Shoup, who would earn the Medal of Honor for his actions, rallied the survivors, but the situation was desperate. For 76 hours, the battle was a chaotic, close-quarters struggle to cross the beach, blast the defenders out of their reinforced concrete pillboxes, and secure a foothold. When the smoke cleared, the island was secured, but the cost was staggering. In just 76 hours, the Marine Division suffered over 3,400 casualties. Of the thousands of Japanese defenders, only 17 were captured alive. Tarawa was the first time the Marines faced a truly fortified beachhead, and the sheer, concentrated insanity of that frontal assault places it at number 3 on our list. Our number 2 assault is not just a battle, it was a campaign of annihilation. Codenamed Operation Iceberg, the Battle of Okinawa was the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War and the final most brutal battle of World War II. Involving over 500,000 American personnel, this was the invasion of a part of the Japanese homeland, and the fighting was on a scale that dwarfed everything that came before. While the initial landings on April 1, 1945, Easter Sunday, were surprisingly light, the Marines and Army soon ran into the main Japanese defenses, a series of interlocking lines built into the island's southern terrain. This was the Shuri Line, a defensive masterpiece centered on ancient castles and fortified ridges like Sugarloaf Hill, Conical Hill, and the infamous Hacksaw Ridge. The 82-day battle became a nightmarish crawl through a sea of mud and gore. The constant rain turned the battlefield into a quagmire, making every foot of progress a victory. The battle for Sugarloaf Hill alone saw the position change hands 11 times and cost the 6th Marine Division over 2,600 casualties in 10 days. Offshore, the U.S. Navy was locked in a death struggle with waves of over 1,900 kamikaze attacks, which sank 36 ships and killed nearly 5,000 sailors. The Okinawans called the battle the Typhoon of Steel. It resulted in staggering casualties. Over 12,500 Americans killed, 110,000 Japanese soldiers, and an estimated 140,000 Okinawan civilians. The sheer scale of the carnage and the fanatical, suicidal nature of the defense on Japanese soil convinced American war planners that an invasion of the main islands would cost 1 million American lives. The insanity of Okinawa was the final argument that led directly to the decision to use the atomic bomb. There are battles, and then there is Iwo Jima. No other assault in the Pacific War, or perhaps in history, embodies the word insane more completely. An 8-square-mile piece of volcanic rock, it was described by one Marine general as the most heavily fortified area in the history of warfare. The brilliant Japanese commander, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, had created a masterpiece of defense. He forbade wasteful banzai charges. His 21,000 defenders would fight from an 11-mile network of underground tunnels and bunkers, engineered so that every single inch of the island was covered by interlocking fields of fire. The Marines would not be fighting an army on an island. They would be fighting the island itself. The 36-day battle was a bloodbath of shocking proportions. The soft volcanic ash made it impossible to dig foxholes, and the Japanese, firing from thousands of hidden positions, turned the beaches into a slaughterhouse. The battle devolved into a yard-by-yard struggle of flamethrowers, demolition charges, and grenades, as Marines had to destroy one bunker at a time, often only for Japanese soldiers to reoccupy it through their tunnels. For the first and only time in the Pacific War, total American casualties, at over 26,000, would exceed those of the Japanese. Nearly 7,000 Marines were killed, 1/3 of all Marines killed in the entire war, in a single 36-day battle. The strategic goal, to secure emergency airfields for B-29s, was vital, saving the lives of over 24,000 American airmen by the war's end. But it's the sheer, unimaginable cost that makes Iwo Jima number 1. More medals of honor were awarded to Marines and Navy corpsmen on Iwo Jima than in any other single battle in American history. It was a 360-degree meat grinder that demanded a level of courage that defies comprehension. It was the costliest battle in the history of the United States Marine Corps. Tarawa, Peleliu, Saipan, Okinawa, Iwo Jima. They are more than names on a battle map. They represent the escalating horror of the Pacific War, a crescendo of violence that pushed an entire generation of men to their breaking point and beyond. They were insane, not because the men who fought them were insane, but because they were asked to do the impossible. And they did it, paying a price in blood and courage that secured victory and echoes through history. Which of these assaults do you think was the most brutal? Did we get the ranking right? Let us know in the comments below. And for more deep dives into military history, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.